Hi, Grandma here reading The Golden Goblet. Ranofer in the previous chapter has started work as a stone cutter, and he's not happy with it at all. He would much rather be making golden leaves. He feels like it's a more delicate skill, and he's concerned that he's going to hurt himself so that he can never work in gold. And where he is the stone cutter is Goblet, his half-brother, is the owner of it. He's the master. Chapter 7. The cool days of winter passed, and the face of Egypt changed in accordance with the rhythm of the Nile, that miraculous river which brought new life and wealth each year to the long valley it watered. Each fall it overflowed its banks and spread over the fields in a silver flood. Islands disappeared, and men and animals walked about their business on a crisscross network of dikes. Each winter the waters withdrew, leaving behind a thick new layer of mud, so black and fertile that 2 crops grew in Egypt while other lands eked out 1, and covered the black with emerald. Continued to shrink under the ever more powerful sun as the emerald ripened into gold. Now it was harvest time. Every available man went out into the fields to gather in the gold of grain and fodder. In the wake of the reaper's scythes, the black land showed again through the stubble, no longer moist and rich, but bone-hard and desiccated, and beginning to crack in all directions under the bursting sun. Eventually, the cracks would spread into treacherous gashes, sometimes 10 or 15 feet deep, and wide enough to trap a man's leg. Temple building ceased in this season to free more men for the fields. The faces in the stone-cutting shop changed accordingly. Only top craftsmen and young apprentices continued to work the stone. Goblet was in and out of the shop all day, usually remaining for several hours in either the morning or the afternoon, personally overseeing or working alongside his craftsmen. The presence of the master, Ranofer discovered, sharpened Pai's already sharp eye and diminished his short temper to the vanishing point. To work under Pai these days was to feel yourself caught in a swarm of angry bees, all stinging, buzzing, and hurling themselves at you tirelessly. The only respite from the torment, which in Ranofer's resentful opinion caused more mistakes than it corrected, was during the midday break. In order to escape for a time from the sight of Pai as well as the sound of him, Ranofer began leaving the shop each day. He walked along the streets until the changing slope of his shadow on the heat-baked dirt underfoot told him he must return, and begin again his interminable chipping at the rough red granite slab that would eventually become one side of the high priest's outer coffin. One midday, 40 long and miserable days after his apprenticeship had begun, his feet turned of themselves toward the street of the goldsmiths and carried him along the well-known way until he stood no more than a pebble's toss from Rake's courtyard wall. He went no closer. Until now, he had not dared to come this far. From the longing that rose beside him as he stood looking at the familiar friendly gate, he knew it had been a mistake to come at all. Still he stood and stared and remembered until he felt the sun burning down on his bare feet and knew his shadow had crept up behind him. He turned quickly, hurried along the street, and almost collided with somebody who shot out of the apprentices' quarters at that moment. Ranofer found himself looking into Heqet's astonished face. "Ranofer!" cried his friend, and his face split into a grin of delight. "Greeting, Heqet," Ranofer said, but he backed off a step or two, suddenly overcome with self-consciousness. He'd not meant to be caught hanging about Rake's shop like a stray dog. The stone dust that powdered him seemed a badge of slavery, and the 2 blood-stained rags about his fingers on his left hand proclaimed the unskilled depths to which he had fallen. No longer was he the budding craftsman who in spite of a menial position in the gold house could teach apprentices their tasks. Heqet would now be far ahead of him in knowledge and skill, and needed nothing he could offer. Ranofer hid his hands behind him and scuffed a toe in the dust, realizing unhappily that Heqet was doing the same. Self-consciousness was catching. "Well," Heqet said with an effort of heartiness, "you're quite a stranger these days," as the caterpillar said to the butterfly. Ranofer smiled in spite of himself, encountered Heqet's friendly, questioning eyes, and the self-consciousness diminished. "I," he answered, "to myself as well as you. I do not know myself as apprentice to a stonecutter. I do not even wish to," he added, spitting contemptuously in the dust. "You do not like it." "I hate it." Heqet was silent. Ranofer did not blame him. There was nothing to say to such a statement. "And you, Heqet?" he went on quickly. "Tell me how the work goes at Rakes." "Oh, it goes well. I've learned to draw wire, and Seta is teaching me to solder." This time, Ranofer was silent. Seta's face folded before his eyes in an instant. Even with the scowl that his memory reluctantly but justly added, it seemed a face as kindly as a father's compared to Pai's. Pai's image suddenly blotted out the other, and Ranofer started guiltily. "The midday is over. I must run, or I'll taste that foreman's stick." "But wait, we've scarcely said a word to each other." "I know. I wish it were different." "Can you not come again?" "Nay, Ranofer glanced toward the gold house and turned away. "I cannot come here." "Then somewhere else. At the day's end, perhaps. Today. I'll meet you wherever you like." "I can do that," said Ranofer, realizing for the first time there was nothing to prevent it, that working in different shops at different trades did not mean he and Heqet must keep to different worlds. "I will do it. Where shall we meet? The ferry landing?" "Aye, or better, the fish dock beyond." "You'll surely come now." "I'll come. Goodbye till then." With a wave, Heqet made off toward the gold house, and Ranofer started at a run back to his red granite slab. His feet were light with the thought of seeing Heqet again, seeing him often, perhaps every day. All afternoon he thought of nothing but the coming meeting, and when the day was over at last, he was out of the shop and running toward the fish dock the instant his coppers were at his sash. Heqet had farther to come. Ranofer stood for some moments among the great nets spread out to dry on the dock before he saw the familiar little figure, so much better fleshed than his own, squirming through the crowd about the ferry landing and running toward him. "I was afraid you might change your mind," Heqet panted, joyfully clapping him on the shoulder. "Come, let us get away somewhere." "The thicket by the river is cool and private," Ranofer suggested. As they started along the road, he added, "Why did you think I would change my mind?" "I don't know. You're an odd one sometimes." Heqet smiled sideways at him. Ranofer returned the smile, uncomfortably, but could think of nothing to say. They turned off the road presently into the lane between the flower fields, then following the meandering path into the thicket. Foliage arched over their heads, casting a welcome shade, made denser by the stands of tall reeds. Here there was still mud underfoot, cool and soothing after the hot-baked clay of the roads. "Ah, I can hear my toes telling each other what a fine fellow I am to bring them here," Heqet said. "Look, that would make a fine place to sit." He pointed to a spot veiled from the path by only a thin fringe of swaying rushes. Something had crushed the grasses and weeds beyond down into a little nest. Heqet sloshed through the stretch of watery mud to it, then turned and bowed elaborately to Ranofer. "Come into my storeroom," as the pelican said to the fish. Ranofer grinned and obeyed. It did look like a little cool green room with walls of foliage and a door of wedge stalks and a thick springy carpet of matted undergrowth. There was just space enough for them to sit side by side and stretch their feet out. "Now," Heqet said firmly, "tell me about the stonework. Come, don't pull into your shell like a tortoise. It will do you good to say out loud how much you hate it. Curse if you like. There's no one to hear but me, and I don't mind." Ranofer could not help laughing, and as he laughed, he felt a knot untie somewhere inside him and realized he felt better already. It was impossible to stay in a shell with Heqet around, and it was impossible to feel altogether gloomy. He began to talk about the stone cutting shop. It was noisy, it was gritty, it was altogether horrid. The foreman was a living wasp's nest. The other apprentice, a glum and stupid nobody with a chunk of granite where his head ought to be. "Ah, that's better," Heqet said with satisfaction. "And what do you do? Shape blocks or what?" Ranofer told him, fairly spitting out his frustration what he did, and how he must keep his mind on it, no matter how tired or bored he was. "Otherwise, this happens," he said, extending his bandaged fingers. "And worse, oh, much worse. The undercraftsman, Heqet, his hands are a ruin. Heqet, if my hands became like his, I could never go back to gold working." He dropped his voice with the horror he felt, and for once Heqet too was subdued. His eyes fixed on the blood-stained bandages. "You mean to go back to gold working someday then, in spite of all?" he said. "Oh, I do." Ranofer flashed him with a belligerent look. "You may think I cannot, but I will find a way somehow. I even know a way. I have a plan." "You do? What is it?" But Ranofer did not want to talk about the plan, about the donkey and the little house at the edge of the desert, and studying with VII. It seemed too improbable. It was safer not told, not yet. "No matter," he said. "Tell me instead about the gold house. It's all the same there?" "Nay, not without you." Ranofer smiled one-sidedly. "No doubt Seta and Heqet and the others weep for me each morning before the gold is weighed. Aside from my absence, is all the same?" "Well, others are absent also. Ibni, to whom good riddance, and the scribe, you remember, Heqet, left a week before harvesting began. His child has the falling sickness. Heqet is taking her to Abydos, to the priest of Ra there. Rake fashioned a little amulet from the sweep for her, so the priests might say their spells over it. Meanwhile, we have a new scribe. And you? You have learned to draw wire and to solder?" "I'm learning, I think." "As the hare said when he tried to fly," Heqet added wryly. So far I have not succeeded in making anything stick to anything else, but no doubt next week or perhaps next year." "Aye," Ranofer said. "My boxes fell apart too at first. Don't lose hope. One day they will stick, and then you will have no more trouble." "Your father taught you to solder?" "Aye, but no doubt I've forgotten. It has been so long, and it will be longer before I can do it again. Curse Goblet and his granite." The boys sat in silence a moment. Then Ranofer added, "I would rather have Goblet for a master, though, than that friend of his." "What friend is that?" "Winneman, the mason. He comes often to the shop. He came today. He reminds me of a calf." "Winneman," repeated Heqet, frowning. "Does he wear a long cloak winter and summer?" "Aye, that's the one." "Oof, I've seen him often. He lives near the apprentices' quarters. He makes me shiver, but the man I sometimes see with him is even worse. A great, heavy-shouldered fellow with a scowl and a face like stone." Heqet broke off and turned to Ranofer with a sudden question in his eye. "That is Goblet," Ranofer told him. Heqet's expression changed. He looked at Ranofer as if he'd never really seen him before, and there grew in his eyes a look of such troubled pity that Ranofer flushed and got quickly to his feet. It is late. The dark will be here soon. Wait! Heqet scrambled up too, then hesitated as if he did not know how to say what he wanted to. I was thinking, he said at last, if we met often in the evening or even at midday, I could tell you all that I learned. I mean, at the Gold House, unless it was something you'd learned already. That way, you would have the knowledge. Then, when you came back to Rake someday, you will lack only the practice. Light broke and grew inside Ranofer. He felt as if the sun were coming up. We could do that. You could learn from Seta, and I could learn from you. I! Heqet became very excited. We'll do it every day. I will meet you here tomorrow. We could come at midday and eat our food here. Ranofer, who never had food to eat anywhere at midday, saw more shame ahead and drew into his shell again. Nay, that is, I do not know if I can get away. Well, you got away today, Heqet reminded him. But Seta says I'm to try beading in the morning. Have you learned that yet? Nay, but beading. The temptation was too strong. All right, midday I'll come. I must get some food to bring somehow, Ranofer thought as he hurried toward home. I will save part of what I have tonight and part of the mornings. Perhaps Gabu will leave 2 loaves this time. Okay, I'm going to stop there and I'll finish the next time. Bye-bye.